So it's been more than 2 months now since the book released, and I think that was the last time that I did one of these videos. In subsequent weeks, I had been much busier than I had anticipated in really good ways, giving lots of interviews and responding to all sorts of requests related to the book and the publicity surrounding it, which was great, and I'm sure that will continue through the fall in different ways with the election looming. I'm also ready to transition back to teaching. We go back into the classroom, modified style on Tuesday. For me, it's my first class, so I'm looking forward to that, and also still trying to put the finishing tweaks on Moodle and Teams and figure all of that out. But at this point, I thought I would, I'm still getting a lot of emails from readers, which I absolutely love, and so many readers. I think probably I really need to file these all and count them up. I think we're probably around 150 right now of readers of Jesus and John Wayne who have written me to tell me what the book has meant to them and how their own lives and their own experiences have mapped onto the story that I tell in Jesus and John Wayne. And these letters have been absolutely remarkable, from people deep inside conservative institutions, conservative organizations, from pastors, from men, from women. Some of these stories are heart-wrenching. Some of them, all of them just display a kind of both lament and then resilience and determination to move forward in a different way. And so these have been just enormously encouraging to me as a writer to hear how my words have been received. And so thank you all so much for those. As I sat down today to return to another one that came my way, another letter, I realized that maybe I can answer some of these through video and as well as a personal response. And the letter that came to me today asks some more personal questions about, many of the readers of Jesus and John Wayne, not all, but many are Christians themselves, many are evangelicals. And so this is an answer to Ryan, who wrote me, and but to many others, I think, who have been curious, and I've addressed this in limited ways in different interviews and on podcasts and so on. But it's a question about my own faith. If I grew up as a conservative evangelical, and then how my faith journey has kind of transpired from that time. And if you read the opening, the introduction to Jesus and John Wayne, you'll know that there's not a quick and easy answer to, yes, I grew up conservative evangelical, this is all my story, and then I left it, because I grew up in a kind of, definitely in a conservative Christian religious culture, but not one that really identified as evangelical, certainly not back in the 1970s when I was born. I grew up in the Christian Reformed denomination, and I grew up in a small town in northwest Iowa that was very Christian Reformed Dutch immigrant community. I myself am the daughter of a Dutch immigrant. And so my religious affiliation was always very particular to that tradition, to that denomination, and often kind of over against the rest of American Christianity. And that was the case for many in my community, I think. My dad was a pastor and theology professor, and so I got a pretty pure dose of Reformed thinking and this Reformed tradition. And then I went off to Dordt College in my hometown, so I didn't go off very far, just a few blocks. But I also was immersed in this kind of Dutch religious and intellectual tradition, so rather unique. It was only when I went off to graduate school that I was really opened up to the broader evangelical world. Even though I had taken a course in the history of evangelicalism at Dordt, I really met kind of real evangelicals at the University of Notre Dame. Many of my classmates were coming direct from Moody Bible Institute, from Wheaton College, from Bob Jones University. And so that's when I realized, kind of that there's this whole world, and that my own kind of religious tradition was very, very much on the margins of something much bigger. Now, that said, in the introduction to Jesus and John Wayne, I do reflect on the fact that even though I grew up thinking of myself as part of a distinctive religious tradition, I also, looking back, I can see how I was increasingly immersed in this broader evangelicalism, largely through consumer culture, through listening to Christian radio, Christian contemporary music. I think I owned one secular cassette tape in all of my childhood, young adult years even, and that was Tiffany, so Confession. But otherwise, it was all Jars of Clay and Amy Grant and so on, Petra, and yes, I could go on. The one bookstore in my small town was a Christian bookstore, True Vine, and so like our kind of the music, home decor, knickknacks, precious moments, books. It was all essentially, white evangelicalism that was available to us. And so as I kind of went off to graduate school, started studying evangelicalism, started like getting to know people from the heart of the evangelical subculture, I realized that my points of connection, such as I had any, were largely through this immersion in an evangelical consumer culture. And so that's the very long answer to the question of, are you a conservative, or were you ever a conservative evangelical or not? I didn't ever really identify as that. I always acknowledged that there was some distance. I was coming from a distinct tradition, and yet my own denomination has, especially in the last 20 or 30 years, I think become more deeply influenced by conservative evangelicalism, by this consumer culture, by Christian radio, by Dobson, focus on the family, absolutely. Also by folks like John Piper and Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, the Gospel Coalition, right? These have deeply influenced many Christian Reformed pastors as well. So it's complicated. Where does that leave me today? I still attend. I'm a practicing Christian. I attend a Christian Reformed church just down the road from where I live and down the road from Calvin University. I teach at a Christian university. And what I've found is, I think having this distinctive intellectual and religious heritage on which to draw, and it's also a complicated heritage. You can many people have taken that in a conservative direction, more pietist direction. Many have taken it in a social justice tradition. All of this can be found in the Reformed tradition. But the Reformed tradition that first grabbed me really as a college student, the vision that was cast by some of my professors at Dort, who were themselves Dutch or Canadian or Dutch Canadian, was a much more expansive understanding of the Reformed tradition and of Christianity itself. So my philosophy professor, John Vanderstelt, I remember his favorite Bible passage was, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, there is freedom. So imagine and he used that to show that, this is not a legalistic faith. This is not a legalistic or scholastic tradition where you have to follow all these rules and get all of your thinking just right and check all of these boxes, right? The spirit of Christianity is liberation. It is freedom. It is human flourishing, and it is love. And that is the Christianity that I embrace. That's the Reformed tradition that I came to embrace. So imagine my shock when I learned that that's also the motto of Liberty University, where I think it means something very different. An idea of freedom is much more of a kind of Christian nationalist, patriotic, linked to certain ideas of whiteness and conservative politics. My own upbringing was very different, or at least my faith formation as I came to own it was very different. And that is still a faith tradition that I find is vibrant, is life-giving. It has political implications, even though it is not politicized. It draws on historic Christian teachings, on tradition, and also on contemporary understandings of justice. It's a tradition that I think is important personally, not that doesn't just draw on itself. When I was growing up, I understood that my kind of corner of Reformed Christianity was the ultimate source of all truth And what I've come to see, and has been kind of repeatedly surprising to me, to realize how much truth and beauty and goodness there is in other Christian traditions, or in other traditions more generally. And so my own faith in recent years has also been influenced, I think, by prophetic tradition in American Christianity, in the Black church in particular, and in other kind of liberation theologies, and also so a wide variety of influences. And many of these, by the way, I've come across through my historical research, by researching progressive Methodism in the 1960s, by researching global Christianity in the 1960s and up to the present, and realizing that there are so many sources of Christian teaching, conceptions of Christian truth, which are very biblical, but can help me see the limitations of many teachings within white American Christianity. So it's a dynamic tradition, and it's a dynamic kind of faith experience, and one that I think also I continue to walk in light of this idea of where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So it's a faith that's not a fearful one. It's not one that you have to fight for the truth. It's one that is kind of open hands, open arms, that can receive truth, receive love and grace, and ideally give those as well. So another question that Ryan had asked related was what my view is if I did in fact identify as a white evangelical, which again I don't really, even though I've been influenced by white evangelicalism, what my view is on whether we need to kind of rebuild, reclaim, redeem the brand of evangelicalism. And there, I'm just not one of those people that thinks that we really need to reclaim white evangelicalism. Or the label was what Ryan had used in his email to me, the label of white evangelicalism. And I think that's a really good word to think about. This is a label that we've put on a movement, and then or a set of beliefs and a tradition, and then it kind of takes on a life of its own. And at this point, I think that label has been largely, not completely, but largely now affiliated with a white nationalist conservative political agenda. Do we need to redeem evangelicalism? I honestly don't understand why we would. As a historian, I understand that the meaning of evangelical has changed dramatically over time. I also understand that if you go back to the 19th century, you can find many progressive impulses within evangelicalism. And many of those progressive impulses have produced kind of liberal and progressive traditions today, social justice Christianity, this kind of social gospel teachings, and that in some ways they also are heirs to an earlier evangelicalism. So I don't see a huge problem with kind of retiring the label at this point, or conceding the label, and kind of regrouping. And do we need a label? Probably not, especially when there are many vibrant kind of Christian traditions that are already happening. Again, I've referenced the Black church, and global Christianities, and more progressive Christian communities, and that I don't quite understand the motivation of many evangelicals, with all good intentions, that we have to really exert a lot of energy to redeem this particular brand. That seems to be almost a kind of self-centered, self-focused, thinking that somehow the fate of Christianity in America depends on us redeeming this particular label or this particular brand, which I think kind of gets things wrong and is part of the problem that has brought us to this point. Rather, the idea that if this particular strand, which now carries that label, has been corrupted to a point that it may be best to leave it, then there's really no need to keep working to redeem that particular label. I respect that other people want to fight the good fight and make that happen and absolutely go for it. That's just really not where I have found myself. And again, I've never really owned that label, owned that brand, and so I'm kind of coming at this from a bit of a marginal perspective. So I think that addresses Ryan's questions, at least to this point, and helps me identify and situate myself in terms of my own faith tradition, my own faith journey. And I will say that in the aftermath of the book's release, the publicity that I've done, I've had all sorts of amazing conversations with evangelicals, with ex-evangelicals, with atheists, with folks really across the religious spectrum, and all of these conversations have been absolutely lovely. And I think that there is more space right now for this kind of civil conversation around highly contested issues, faith and politics, than we might give ourselves credit for. Certainly than comments on social media will suggest. And so I found that incredibly encouraging.